Hola to my future viewers. My name is Audrey Zubenel, and throughout this video you will see my documentation of my trip to Spain and Portugal this summer. It honestly all still feels like a fever dream when I think back to the overwhelming sensation of walking into the Sagrada Familia Basilica for the first time. This was a personal and spiritual encounter that has just been life changing for me and shifted my views on what I thought architecture was. This experience inspired my continued research into preservation, restoration, and rehabilitation practices in Spain and in Portugal. We started our trip off flying into Barcelona, and we went to about 7 or 8 different cities, kind of making a C shape, going down the coast of Portugal and ending in Madrid. The reason I chose historic preservation as my research topic really comes from my inspiration of my native hometown. I grew up outside of the city in Kansas City, always going there to visit the old houses, and I've always had such a love and appreciation for old buildings and old history in general. So I felt that Europe was the perfect place to dive so much deeper into the world of historic architecture. Both of these countries have rich and intertwined histories that face significant challenges and opportunities in these different preservation fields. Both nations are home to an extraordinary array of historic sites and architectural marvels that necessitate meticulous care and conservation efforts. The preservation of these assets is crucial for maintaining the cultural identities of Spain and Portugal, and restoration endeavors are essential to mitigate the impacts of time, environmental factors, human activities, and really just ensuring the monuments and historic sites retain their structural integrity and their aesthetic values. Overall, my analysis helped highlight the importance of integrating community involvement, new innovative practices, as well as policy support in the ongoing efforts to conserve these invaluable heritage sites. Some of my favorite aspects of this trip are really seeing some of the oldest architecture in the world. The first being the Moorish castle that we visited in Sintra, with that dating back to the 11th century, as well as Alhambra in Granada. I think seeing these structures in person, knowing how old they are and how well that they kept up, has influenced and continued to blow my mind at the integrity and the influence these structures continue to have on our day-to-day lives. Now I'm going to kind of call myself out here and say some nerdy things, but another aspect that I find very interesting about these historic sites is the impact that they can have on our entertainment industry. There was the castle in Seville that we visited that was used as a castle in Game of Thrones, for all you Game of Thrones nerds out there, as well as the Plaza de España in Seville was used as a scene as the planet Naboo in Star Wars. And I think that aspect adds a whole different depth into these historic sites because it shows the characteristics of how these sites were intentionally supposed to be used, and it also allows people to implement their own findings and their own views on how these spaces affect them. To conclude this summary of my study abroad trip to Spain and Portugal, I want to highlight 3 key takeaways from this study abroad experience and how I can implement these takeaways into my practice and design for the future. My first takeaway from this trip is the understanding of culture. Prior to this trip this summer, I have never been out of the country, and the only experience that I've had with different cultures has been when I have traveled to different areas of the United States or interacted with people from different cultural backgrounds. And actually being in these cities and experiencing these places in person was an amazing experience that I will never take for granted. The second takeaway that I have from this study abroad experience is the impact that I have in my field as an architect. Obviously, prior to this trip, I knew that the world was huge, but being able to fly across the ocean and being put into a new culture and a new city that I have never been to really put myself into perspective and where I fall in the timeline of history, and has really grown my appreciation for all of these historic structures that we visited. And finally, my third key takeaway from this study abroad experience is the historic preservation impact that is going to have on my studies. I'm currently pursuing the historic preservation certificate and will be graduating with that. So this experience, being able to understand the culture and the history behind all of these amazing structures that we visited, will really allow me to hone in on this experience when designing for the future. And with that, I hope you enjoyed my video and were able to learn something new about historic preservation in Spain and Portugal.